And for those who have not met, I'm Michael Goldberg. I'm the executive director of our Veale Institute for Entrepreneurship at Case Western Reserve University. And I'm also an associate professor at the Weatherhead School of Management. I see my colleague Tracy just popping on. Tracy, I'm in my office, I guess a couple floors below you. And it's wonderful to welcome sort of back to campus as we do things these days via Zoom, Mark Roman, who's a really distinguished alum, has been doing some amazing things in his career, writing and speaking about them as well. So when we connected, we were really pleased that Mark was able to make the time to participate in our alumni speaker series. All of our speaker series events are moderated by our Case students, and we're thrilled that Sanjeev Korg, who is an undergraduate student who actually had a great summer internship this summer working in the world of angel investing with North Coast Ventures, and has been an active member of our Northeast Ohio Student Venture Fund chapter here at the university. So Sanjeev and I have gotten to know each other. So Sanjeev, thank you for agreeing to do this today. For those that are watching on LinkedIn Live, welcome. Put any questions that you might have for Mark just in the comment box, and Doug and I will be sort of monitoring. And if you're on Zoom, you can let Sanjeev know just by putting a message in the Zoom chat. And if you're willing to ask the question directly, even better, or Sanjeev can read the question for you. So with that, Mark, thank you again for taking the time. And Sanjeev, thanks for moderating, and over to you, Sanjeev.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Hi, everyone. Michael sort of introduced me for myself, but just want to say I'm a sophomore, double majoring in finance and accounting. Really glad to be here. Thanks a lot, Mark, for joining us. Mark is the founding partner of Denovo Advisors. He's an independent author. He's had a very successful career in healthcare operations management as well. And Mark graduated from Case in 1980 with a Bachelor of Science in Operations Management with concentrations in organic chemistry, operations research, and organizational behavior and optimal design. How are you doing today, Mark?
Hey, Sanjeev. Hey, Michael. Hey, all. Thanks for having me today. As these guys have said, I graduated in 1980. It's 40 years ago in May 10th, as a matter of fact, that I walked across the stage at Severance Hall to grab my sheepskin, and kept on moving forward. I joined Arthur Andersen Consulting, and I stayed through for 11 years. I actually left Accenture as an associate partner. And let me tell you, you will always have people that try to rain on your parade. I had so many people tell me, "Oh my God, Mark, what the heck are you doing? You can't leave Accenture. You're a partner." Well, I had been bitten by the entrepreneurial bug, and I moved to Chicago, where I had a business partner, and we started two small companies, one called Health Connections and another one called Health Network Ventures. And I probably always had more guts than brains because the woman who was my business partner, her husband was the president of the American Hospital Association, and he got us we figured out that what we were going to try to do was connectivity between companies and laboratories so that we could exchange information. And this was all kind of pre-internet. After we launched, a new technology came out called Mosaic from Netscape, which was one of the first browsers. So we went from green screen to Mosaic. And so, like I said, I probably have always had more guts than brains. We figured the telephone companies would be really prime for this because it would add additional traffic over their networks, right? So we got an appointment with Bob Barnett, who was the chairman and chief executive officer of Ameritech Corporation, which owned Ohio Bell, Illinois Bell, Wisconsin Bell, Michigan Bell, Indiana Bell. And we got an audience with him, and we went in to ask for $10 million. And we had done our business case, and we had our, our business model together, and we had a bunch of overhead slides on transparencies. So we could put them on and talk to Bob about. So we said, well, we need 10 million. And Bob said, tell you what, meet me up in Wisconsin tomorrow. We were in Chicago. And, we'll talk more tomorrow. So we met in this office, a Ameritech office up in Wisconsin. And the next morning, his chopper came in and landed on the front yard, and his executive assistants climbed out of the plane or out of the chopper and came in. And Bob was walking with literally a paper shopping bag. And we were sitting in a conference room, and he dumps this paper bag with all these other pieces of paper in it. And we're like, what's this? And he said, these are my 94-year-old mother's stuff. How is your solution going to fix this? So we said, well, Bob, give us an hour. Why don't you go get a cup of coffee? I'm sure you've got some phone calls to make, etc. So he went away and came back an hour later. Well, we got on the whiteboard with Post-it notes and double-faced tape, and we did transaction flows of his mother's, like her visit to a doctor, and how her laboratory information could be available, and who would pay for it, that type of thing. And he understood what we were doing, and he said, okay, I'll give you your 5 million. Well, being young and stupid, I said, oh, Bob, no, Bob, it was 10 million. And he said, no, I said, I'll give you 5. You sell it to somebody, they'll give you the other 5. And so we got an appointment with Gail Warden, who was the CEO of Aurora Health Systems in Milwaukee. And we had dinner with Gail and showed him what we were doing. And he called Al Sinisi, who was the CIO, and said, Al, what do you think about what these guys want to do? And Al said, thumbs up, this would help solve some of our problems. So Gail said, I'm in for 5. Well, Gail Gullinson and I looked at each other, and we were like, oh, wow, this caught the bus. We have our 10 million. Now we've, and that's one piece of advice that I have for everybody, is once you do get funding, your job isn't done. Matter of fact, your job is just beginning as an entrepreneur, because you cannot slack off because you got money in the bank and you can write checks and you can staff or whatever. That's when the fun really starts. So that was my first foray into entrepreneurship. And so we started off with 10 million. 4 years later, we had both companies. We had an annual run rate of revenue of about 250 million. And so we stayed with both companies for another 2 years. And then 6 years into that venture, we sold both companies for 750 million, giving our 2 initial investors, Ameritech and Aurora Health Systems, a really nice, healthy return. At that point in time, I was being recruited by IBM to go help start the IBM Consulting Group. And so the other thought that I want to leave with you is, from my perspective, entrepreneurship is a state of mind. Because let me tell you, at IBM, I could be incredibly entrepreneurial. I got an audience with, Lou Gerstner was the CEO at the time. And I said, Lou, we had similar idea to what we did with Ameritech. We called it HDN, Health Data Network. We branded it. And the issue that I had at IBM was we were a marketing machine. Man, we could, I could throw some napkins at somebody and they'd have slides and brochures and you name it. But when it came to the operations, that was one of those things where it was like, oh my God, if we sell this, what are we gonna do? But we got 85 million from Lou to start the HDN business. And about 3 years later, we were up to 600 million. And we had only projected about 300 million. And Gerstner said, Roman, hey, were you sandbagging? Said, what are you talking about, Lou? he said, why did you underestimate the revenue so severely? We were like, we didn't expect we would get what we got, right? Then so it was one of those things. But so then I was so at IBM was my biggest P&L. I had about a $19.5 billion P&L. But when you get 30,000 people working for you, the bigger the numbers, the more places you have to squirrel away, little funds for market development or solution development or whatever it happened to be. But my message to you is you can be incredibly entrepreneurial in a large organization. So it is definitely a state of mind as well as a set of technologies and capabilities that you all are learning. And I started. I worked at EDS, and another one of those where I had people going, "Oh my God, Mark, you can't leave IBM. EDS is like going to the Marines from, that's just crazy. That's Ross Perot. That's stupid. So I had lots of people that were trying to rain on my parade, every transition I made, but it was one of those where, every initiated transaction that I made as far as my career was concerned, I had a basis for it, whether it was personal or professional, and everybody makes changes for lots of reasons. And then subsequently I started working with Lumeris, which is a startup that was founded by John Doerr and Mike Long. So we did a lot of work with Clarkins and with Camden Partners, which is the investment arm of the Johns Hopkins University Health System. But my message to you is, be authentic, be yourself. And I think it was Oscar Wilde who said, "Be yourself because everyone else is taken," which I think is pretty humorous. But don't try to be something that you're not. As I said, entrepreneurship is a state of mind. And don't let someone who has given up on their dreams talk you out of yours. Because, and I think I might have said it before, just remember, when somebody says it's impossible, that's just an opinion. And there are plenty of opinions out there. So as folks that are coming up through the ranks and kind of planning your careers, my business partner, Greg Johnson, and I started Denovo Advisors a couple of years ago. And we have carved out a really unique niche for ourselves. We do operational diligence for private equity and venture capital and for family offices of the ultra wealthy who want to make a direct investment in a founder or in a business. And, Greg's kept me off the road. He had the tremendous connections in Northeast Ohio because Greg was a very successful entrepreneur and had a custom development shop that he ended up selling about 5 years ago. And he and I decided to hang our shingle. And operations diligence is what we focus on. And it's one of those areas where a lot of times operations, when people think entrepreneurship, you think finance, right? You don't necessarily think operations. And let me tell you, you gotta understand how money works. So that's the finance and the investing components of it. So we don't do any of the financial diligence for these firms, and we don't do any of the legal diligence because every firm that we work with already has a legal team. They've already got a lot of smart MBAs and folks that are going to, know what their heuristics are and are going to be able to do the financial diligence. But I'll just share with you a couple of anecdotes. Greg and I met with the CEO of a healthcare AI company a while ago, and he was looking for $20 million, and we were trying to hook him up with one of our clients. And I'll change the name to protect the innocent. I'll just call him Colin. Said to Colin, "Well, what's your board made up? What's your board look like?" And he said, "My board." And I said, "Yeah, who's your advisory board? Who is advising you on your growth path. And he said, well, I've got my uncle and I've got someone else. And so anyway, we coached him on that. And then I asked him about his financials. I said, how many years of audited financial statements do you have? And he said, well, my wife does the books. She uses QuickBooks. And I said, that's cool. I mean, but who's your auditor? Who has audited those financial statements? And he's had no idea what we were talking about. And I said, Colin, forgive me, but nobody's going to give you $20 million on your boyish good looks and charm. You have to understand they are going to want to see you succeed. And that's the other message that I have for you is don't treat your investors or your funding source, don't treat them as the enemy. I'm always amazed at how some entrepreneurs and founders look at a PE or venture capitalist as, man, they're getting too invasive. Why are they asking all these questions? Well, guess what, guys? They want to see you succeed as much as or more than you do. So take their advice, and we've done some coaching and some counseling, but when you look at your operations, I think there's several things that we looked for. First of all, your operations have to be predictable. They have to be sustainable. They have to be resilient. They have to be stable. And maybe number one is they have to be defined. And I'll just give you one example. What's your operational flow for taking a prospect to a customer? What do you do? What do those steps look like in your operations? And are your operations, are they predictable? And are they documented? Are they maintained? And this one you'll probably chuckle at. Are they teachable? Can you actually instruct somebody on them? And then are they taught? Are your people actually trained in their operations and what their role is? And do you have well-defined operations? And many times, a lot of the private equity and venture firms will not necessarily focus on operations. And one of the things that Greg and I tell people is we give them confidence that the investment that they're making is sustainable, and we give them confidence that the odds of getting a return on that investment are pretty high. That's we have one anecdote of my previous company, Creative Evolution. I was doing commercialization of intellectual property for colleges, universities, and for healthcare organizations. And I was dealing with a physician out of Washington, D.C., out of Georgetown University Medical Center. And he had what I would almost call a nutraceutical company, not a pharmaceutical company, but he was, making sublingual vitamins and sports drinks with vitamins and things of that nature. And we were doing a little bit of operations diligence with him. And, we looked as we do with our engagements today, we were also looking at the staff. And do you have the right athlete in the right position, for lack of another metaphor? And do you have folks out there that can back up? And we look at suppliers as well when we look at operations. And this is just as important as if you're a web-based company or if you're a manufacturing company. Who are your suppliers? And are your suppliers stable? And do you have backup suppliers? So if you're using AWS for your hosting, let's say, well, what would happen if AWS went offline, or their contractual arrangements changed? And would you look at Azure? Would you look at IBM? Would you look at some of the other web hosting types of services? And you really want to give some thought to that before you have something that is catastrophic. So back to the story of the physician from Washington, D.C., he called one point in time, and one of the things that we highlighted in our operations diligence was they had all of their raw materials and finished product in a warehouse which was contiguous with the manufacturing floor. Well, it's not rocket science. Didn't your grandmother or mom tell you don't put all your eggs in one basket? Well, we said, you really ought to look at some contract manufacturing space, because everything you've got is tied up in this one manufacturing facility and in the one warehouse. And you really ought to look at spreading your finished product and your raw materials a little bit. So we got a call. And he said, well, next time I'm in Cleveland, we're gonna have an I told you so dinner. He said, do you know where I'm at? I said, no, I have no idea. He's calling off of his cell phone. He said, I'm in Atlanta. I'm flying out to LA. The factory had a fire last night. I was like, oh crap, just one of those heart in your mouth, just sinking feelings. And he said, I'll get you that I told you so dinner. There's no joy in that for us. He lost about $40 million worth of raw material and finished product. The fire was actually contained relatively quickly. It was the problem was the factory and the warehouse had a wet fire suppression system. So everything, all of these dry materials for his sublingual vitamins and all of that was ruined by the water and then by the smoke. So, $40 million loss. It's one of those where I think it was Albert Einstein said, in the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. So,
Mark, this is great. I want to make sure that we put Sanjeev to work here and getting some questions in as well.
Okay.
Great thing. So Sanjeev.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark, I really appreciate you talking about some stories along your career. I want to transition to your current role at Denovo. What does it look like when you conduct due diligence for investors, and what are some steps that people can take to improve their quality of diligence?
Sure. Well, first off is and this is probably going to sound obvious, Sanjeev, but take advice. Reach out to people who have been there. And when you're engaging with a private equity or venture capital firm, sit down with them, interview them, for lack of a better term, and understand what their process is and what decisions they're going to make along the way with their process. And that's when it comes to the financial and the legal. We look at the operations. So we look for things like organizational charts. We look for contracts with suppliers. We look at your sales and marketing, your distribution channels. We really look at all of the operations. And, Greg and I do 99% of our work is remote. It's just as we're doing today. It's via Zoom typically, because all of the clients that we've got, with very rare exception, are people that we've worked with previously. And that's just I'll just tell you that's another thing. Guard your LinkedIn profile and your network religiously. Try not to burn any bridges if you can, and spread the word. Tell people what you're doing, and you will be, I think you'll be surprised to see where tidbits of advice pop out of the woodwork or from your network and from folks that, again, it's one of those things, Sanjeev, where you don't ask, you don't get, right? If you're about ready to launch into seeking funding, and Greg and I are actually authoring another book that we're our working title is The Definitive Guide to Financing Your Business for founders and entrepreneurs, or what they didn't tell you in B school about financing your business or expansion. And we're really covering the waterfront, right? We're looking at everything from bootstrapping to venture, to private equity, to family office, to things like SBA, Small Business Administration loans, or specialty associations, right? I mean, when I lived in San Francisco, I did a lot of work with a group called AWIB, AWIB, Asian Women in Business. And they only funded businesses that were headed by Asian women. And they had a list of countries that they felt were in their sweet spot. But they had a list of investors that only invested in Asian women's businesses. And, so there's you'd be surprised at how many sources of funding there are out there. So, ask around and don't be shy when you're looking at financing. Again, just keep asking questions until you're sure you know how you're going to answer the questions when they're asked of you.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask was, we're talking about young entrepreneurs. What do they need to know when they're preparing for an influx of capital, and how have you mentored these people along your time with Denovo?
Sure. Well, first off, never ever ever lie. Never lie. Don't try to represent yourself as something that you're not, because it will be found out. So it goes back to my other statement about being authentic and being yourself. If you have issues, then raise them, because your financing organization is going to find those issues at some point in time. And back to an earlier statement that I made, they want you to succeed as much as you do, because they want to see a return, or they certainly want to see their money back with some sort of a return at some point in the future. So it's one of those things where I like to do, and we've done role play, right? And I know everybody kind of, the eyes roll in the back of your head when you say role play. But sit down with one of your fraternity brothers or one of your business partners or whomever, and I call it play stump the stars, right? Get yourself, talk to Michael and Doug and your professors there at Case, and I'm sure that they can link you up with folks in the business, or they can give you a list of typical questions that get asked, and do some role play, do some dress rehearsal, and I'm a big reader, right? I read all the time, and I try to broaden my and I'm a nonfiction reader, but at some point in time, you can learn two ways. You can learn vicariously, which is through reading and learning from other people's mistakes and other people's successes, or you can learn experientially. And at some point in time, you can read about swimming all you want, but at some point in time, you have to get in the pool, and you have to get out there. And so the point being, practice and read as much as you can about it. But at some point in time, it's going to be showtime. So prepare for showtime. And another piece of advice, and Greg and I have been doing interviews for the next book, and we just interviewed the head of healthcare for KKR, for Kravis Coburg Roberts, and it was funny because I said to Chris, what's one piece of advice you would have for an entrepreneur or a founder before? And he said, Mark, you would be surprised how many people can't explain their business to us. It's all locked up here. And if you can't explain your business to your fraternity brothers or to Michael or Doug or whomever, right, and have them understand it, you're not going to get a VC or a private equity firm or a family office to give you money when you can't explain it yourself. So have a good value proposition. And I said before, understand how money works. It sounds pretty obvious, but understand what sort of covenants and what sort of measurements come along with that funding source, because you would be surprised how many organizations, and I'm not talking about entrepreneurial organizations, any organizations get in trouble because they're not in compliance with the covenants that they've agreed to with financing. In a previous life, we went through a revenue and receivables reconstruction for a hospital system because they had a failed billing conversion, and they were not able to reconstruct their revenue and receivables for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And they had a couple $100 million in bonds that were outstanding, that were municipal bonds. And they had, so anyway, sorry, I'm rambling.
That's all right. I want to pass this off to Michael. Michael, you had a question? How would you yourself?
Thanks, Sanjeev, for calling in. Appreciate it. Mark, I was glad that you touched on networking. It's a theme that we touch on a lot in the classroom. A number of our speakers in our entrepreneurship alumni speaker series have touched on it. I'm just sort of curious. I mean, we've got a number of students that are on today, and even for alums, you're somebody that I would imagine a lot of folks are reaching out to for networking. And if you sort of put yourself in the shoes of a student, like what are some tips if a current case student is reaching out to you? How do you stand out? What are things that when you get, whether a LinkedIn invite or someone reach out to you, how do students show that it's worth engaging with them and sort of helping them in that networking process?
Well, I would say first off is to explain what sort of information you're seeking by networking, and be specific. Right, I had an outreach from a case student. I guess it was last week, and you talk about LinkedIn, Michael. I have a little over 8,000 connections on LinkedIn. And as of this morning, there were about 2,400 views of my post for this webcast, right? And so I had the outreach from several case students. And one was very specific, said he wanted to know about my time with Lumeris, because he had read some things about John Doerr. And John was on our board, so I know John. He's a personal friend, and so it was very specific. And for those types of requests, I may not link in with you on LinkedIn because I'm not one of those. I think they call them lions, LinkedIn open networkers. I won't just accept a LinkedIn request from anybody. I want to at least talk to you before I'll open up my network, and my network is open. So, if you're linked in with me on LinkedIn, you can see all of my other LinkedIn connections, and I think that's just fair. But be specific with what it is that you want to ask, and so that individual, I sent a message through LinkedIn and said, I'd be happy to talk next week. Here's kind of a couple days that work, and I'd be happy to talk to you. As a matter of fact, Jin Sun, when we were doing intros earlier, Jin Sun mentioned neurotechnology, right? Well, Jim Cavuto, who's also a Case alum, is the executive editor of Neurotech News, and he specializes in deep brain stimulation, so implants for people that have brain maladies. And so, it's one of those things where if Gene Sun hadn't said something about that, I would have never made the connection. But I offered to him that we could talk, and I could certainly make an introduction to Jim. And I'm always happy to do that. But I'm very, I'm very straight. I'm very upfront with people on my LinkedIn connections. I won't just, I've got Newt Gingrich and Bill Frist and a number of other politicians on, that I've worked with, and people will reach out to me and say, Mark, can you introduce me to Newt Gingrich? For what? What is it that you want to talk to Newt about? And I have to guard that because it's just one of those things where you're extending your reputation by introducing somebody else, and your network is absolutely priceless. I mean, Greg and I chuckle because between the two of us, we have about 12,000 connections on LinkedIn, and we've actually been approached by some recruiting firms to stand down from Denovo and to become executive search partners with another firm. And it's pretty clear they just want our network, but that's not what we're interested in. But networking is kind of the holy grail, Michael, as far as getting out there. And you'd be amazed at the connections that people will, and anybody I've spoken with, and I haven't mentioned it. I guess I mentioned the next book that Greg and I are writing. But in 2018, I had emergency brain surgery, and one of my dreams was to always write a book. So when I was in rehab, I started doing interviews, and what does an old consultant do? You come up with a hypothesis, and then you start data gathering to either prove or disprove that hypothesis or fill in the gaps in your hypothesis. And I sat down and wrote, Conquering the Boundaries of Friendship. And I've always enjoyed writing, but I didn't know I would be any good at it. But this was a dream of mine, and I cannot tell you how many people, social workers, et cetera, that would say, Mark, don't set yourself up for failure. That's really going to be taxing on your brain, et cetera. And I reached out through LinkedIn and gave a brief synopsis of what the book was about. And I've interviewed over 200 men for the book. And my next book, which is called You're Cured, The Definitive Guide to Healing for Caregivers and Patients, which I wrote because of my brain surgery. And the title is partly because my neurosurgeon, when he was done, he came over to the operating table, he put his arms around me and he gave me a big hug, and he said, "You never have to see me again. You're cured." And I was like, what? Wow. That's crazy. You talk about a joyous moment. Well, I went on to interview 400 people, again, using LinkedIn, people that I know that have, had traumatic physical injuries or mental injuries or whatever it happens to be. And, LinkedIn, any social media. So it's LinkedIn more from a professional standpoint, but depending upon, what your niche is, Facebook or Insta, are certainly good platforms for getting your story out there and for making connections. So, but my advice to anybody would be to guard your professional network with your life, because it will serve you for forever, right? Like I said,
Uh-oh.
I
Frozen.
lost him.
Well, okay. Well, we'll give Mark another second for his internet. Okay, Mark, you're back. The Williamsburg, your Williamsburg Wi-Fi connection is, you're muted, Mark.
Yeah, we live about 2.5 miles from the CIA farm here that was made famous in John Grisham novels.
Okay.
So we lose internet and we lose cell service pretty frequently
Gotcha.
due to it being blocked.
Okay.
So it's not necessarily an ideal environment
Yeah.
for.
Mark,
but,
I want to ask this question to you.
Yeah, go ahead, Sanjeev.
Obviously, given the current climate, with the labor market, the pandemic, a lot of students have had their internships canceled. There's a lot of hiring concerns that people have. Coming out of college, people considering maybe staying an extra year in school, getting a master's. How would you handle these adversities that recent graduates are facing, and what advice would you give them?
Well, the main piece of advice I would give Sanjeev is don't give up. Right. This is the COVID is COVID's going to be with us forever. Right. It's a coronavirus. And so don't give up on your dream. Just, stay the course, and you will have setbacks in your career, whether it's market setbacks or competitive setbacks. But that's what being resilient is about, is falling down and getting back up. And I do empathize with recent graduates or folks that had internships, particularly this year, that were canceled, because internships are a fantastic way of getting experience in the field that you're interested in. And I'll just tell one other little story. When I was, and I'm sure they've both retired, but Dale Flowers and Ron Ballou were both professors of operations and operations management. And we started a little group with Ron to do consulting work. And Ron, we wanted to do operations consulting. So we went out, and a group of us actually got an assignment with Higbee's, which was a local department store. And Ron Ballou was the individual who oversaw our work. And so while we were in school, we were doing store labor scheduling, because Higbee's wasn't automated. So they still had paper schedules, but we looked at a number of different parameters, like the value of a product. So small leather goods are one of those things that can walk away pretty easily. So you don't put small leather goods by a door. Well, Higbee's is the old the casino building downtown on Public Square, and we would look at foot traffic. So we had a number of us that observed foot traffic going through the stores, and Ron validated our observations. And it was one of those things where we created an opportunity, and we got paid for it. Higbee's wanted to give us money for what we had done, and we didn't want to take it, but it gave me some great experience of what it was like to be a consultant. So stay the course, Sanjeev, and keep plugging away, and use the time that you've got, assuming you've got additional time, to further your knowledge by reading, picking up the phone, calling people, sending emails. And I will guarantee you that if you just spent 20 minutes a day reading about your particular field of interest, in 10 years, you will be in the top 1% of those people who know about that field. And, you don't have to have a degree to do that, or you don't have to necessarily have experience. But certainly, again, with my, metaphor before of you can read all you want, but at some point in time, you got to jump in the pool. You got to get that real life experience. I would say stay the course, Sanjeev. Don't give up, and put your time to use that. That you can continue on your course.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot for that, Mark. I want to call on Carlin. If you could please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hey, Mark. This is Carlin Jackson. I graduated from Case a couple of years ago, computer science and Master of Finance. But I'm listening to you talk and was really intrigued hearing about your specific focus on operations diligence. And I know you said you have a book coming out, but I wanted to know, have you guys already published like a checklist or something that entrepreneurs or founders can look towards to really make sure they're kind of crossing their T's, dotting their I's?
The short answer, Carlin, is no, we have not. But certainly I don't remember whether you were on or not. So, I talked about what we look for.
Yeah.
And I would be certainly happy to send you my bullet.
Might have lost him again.
He might be frozen. Okay. All right, we'll give Mark another second to hopefully let the CIA stop blocking his. Oh, here he is. Okay, hey, Mark.
How's it going, Mark?
Sorry, guys.
No problem. No problem.
So, Carlin,
We're answering Carlin's questions about the checklist.
Yeah, back to your question. The short answer is no. We haven't published anything. But I went through a list before of kind of categories of that you can, I'll say, do a self-check on your operations. And are your operations predictable? Are they sustainable? Are they resilient? Are they stable? Are they defined? And when I say are they defined, I mean, what are your business? And the example I gave was prospect to customer. What's your process? What's your operational process for taking a prospect and getting them to to a paying customer? And so are they defined? Are they predictable? Are they documented? Are they maintained when something changes in your operations? And then are they teachable? And are they taught? Do you actually teach folks how to are they teachable? Are they taught? And are they tested? Those are the types of things that we look for in operational diligence. And then we look for folks that have deep subject matter expertise. We have about 300 contractors that work with us. So if I need someone, if Greg needs someone who's very deep in process manufacturing, well, we have some former chemi engineering folks that worked in the oil and gas industry, or worked for groups like Dow or Air Products and that type of thing. So we'll bring that expertise to the table. So Carlin, I guess the other category I would give you is industry knowledge and industry specialization, because particularly in healthcare, when it comes to things like pharmaceuticals, we have a chain of custody that must be maintained, because let's say you're on some prescription. Well, we have to know all of the lot numbers that went into making the particular batch that got sent out to your local CVS or Walgreens or whatever it happens to be, because if there were a recall, if it was found out, and I'm sure everybody's seen the the advertisements about ranitidine, the old Zantac, or the branded Zantac being containing high amounts of carcinogens, and some of that chain of custody, particularly in those generics, wasn't maintained. So just to be on the safe side, the FDA and a lot of the retailers have just pulled those. So, but having that knowledge and having it when you're examining the operations is critical. So anything with as far as compliance is concerned, or being tied to industry specificity, are also areas that we look at with when we're doing operational diligence. So, like I said, we've carved out a fairly unique niche for ourselves, but it hasn't been a hard sell. Because a lot of the private equity firms and venture firms, particularly, they're good at the market. They're great at marketing. They're great at finance, but not necessarily at operations.
Yeah.
I just like to say thanks. Right now, I'm in the middle or kind of initial stages of an angel raise, and the diligence here isn't quite as sophisticated, but kind of being a level of operations myself, I always figure it's never too soon to start having the mindset, at least, so that it's not later down the road and we're just now getting started and cleaning up our operational story. So I'm going to probably send you a short note via email, kind of follow up a bit.
Yeah, please. My email is Mark, MARK, at Denovo, DENOVO.LLC, and our website is Denovo.LLC. So feel free to peruse our website or send me a note. And Carlin, I'll just tell you, one of the big growth areas right now for private equity and for venture is the role of operating partner. Operating partners are people that private equity and venture firms put into their target investment companies to number one, to provide some oversight, but also to provide expertise on a particular area where the investment target may not have that sophistication. So keep that operations focus, because it can serve you well in the years coming. And Greg and I have both had numerous offers from private equity and from venture firms to serve as operating partners. But I like the gig we've got.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks a lot, Carlin, for your question. Mark, really want to thank you for your time. We're sort of running to that 2:00 mark. I want to pass it back to Michael Goldberg.
Great. Sanjeev, thank you for moderating. And Mark, this is a great discussion. I'm glad we were able to power through a few in the new world order, the fact that we don't lose internet all the time and use it all the time. We only had a few short moments where we lost you. So, but it was great. I think your advice for our young people, and someone like Carlin Jackson is an awesome former student of mine who's a graduate, who's out kind of in the entrepreneurial world, building a company, raising capital. I think that there was a lot of wisdom and value in a lot of things that you shared today. So thank you for taking the time to.
Well, thanks, Michael and Sanjeev and Carlin and Jinsoon and everybody for joining. And whether you're watching us here on Zoom or if you're on LinkedIn Live or Facebook, whatever, thanks for joining us, and take advantage of the Veale Institute and all of the research that you have at CASE. You got Bob Sopko over at the Think Box, and don't hesitate to ping Michael or Elizabeth Klein, who's with Alumni Relations, because she can hook you up as well.
For sure. And Bob and Elizabeth are both on, so it's great to have them both here. Let me do a little admin for some advertising for future events. So on Thursday, we're back with our alumni speaker series. Matt Sommer, who was a former technology architect at Tesla, at GoPro, really interesting technologist, business person, will be chatting with us today about his work in electric vehicles, on Thursday at 1 o'clock. Then we'll be back next week for 3 different events. On Tuesday, a friend of mine, Forrest Faison, who is the former Surgeon General of the U.S. Navy, and he's the Chief Healthcare Strategy Officer at Cleveland State University, will be with our speaker series. We'll actually be co-sponsoring that event with Cleveland State, so we'll have a student from Cleveland State and from Case moderating that event. On Wednesday, we're partnering with our friends at the School of Medicine. And we'll be hearing from Karen Spilzeski, who's a venture capitalist with Riverbest Venture Partners, talking about the basics of venture capital. That'll be on Wednesday at 4 p.m. And then on Thursday, I've got the book right here in case he's watching. Ian Hathaway, who's the co-author of The Startup Community Way, Evolving an Entrepreneurial Ecosystem, that he wrote with Brad Feld. Ian will be part of our Beyond Silicon Valley class. That'll be next Thursday at 10 o'clock, so we've got a busy week. So again, on behalf of Doug and the others at the Veale Institute, thank you, Mark and Sanjeev, for taking the time, and we look forward to seeing you all soon.